This is another big reason why we need to quit calling addiction a weakness. Hey everybody, what's up? It's Chris from The Rewired Soul, where we talk about the problem, but we focus on the solution. And a question I get a lot is about why mental illness is leading to addiction. And this is a great question because it needs to be talked about more and more. First off, something that we need to realize is that mental illness is one of the leading causes for addiction. So we have to talk about mental illness and addiction. This is one of the reasons why here at The Rewired Soul, I talk about both. I don't just talk about addiction. I don't just talk about mental illness. They all go together. The best way I can talk about mental illness leading to addiction is to just share a little bit about my story. If you want to know it more in depth, I wrote a book. It's on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. What happened with me was, I grew up with an alcoholic mom, already there, just child development, that's getting screwed up. But mental illness runs in my family. My mom ended up, getting on Xanax. I was born addicted to Xanax. She struggled with anxiety, depression, mood disorders, and stuff like that. She's doing great now because she's finally sober and finally getting treated, and she's amazing. We're great. We have a great relationship now. But this was part of my path towards developing mental illness. What happened with me was I started developing symptoms of mental illness in middle school and high school. Aside from all of the symptoms that come along with just being the child of an alcoholic, I started developing serious symptoms of anxiety and depression. So already as a child of an alcoholic, you already feel alone and different than other kids and things like that. But when you start to develop symptoms of mental illness, now you feel even more isolated and more alone, and you start feeling even more different. Something that I'm a big advocate of is that we need to start teaching our children more about mental health. And it's never too soon to do that. If you're a parent out there, listen to the words coming out of my mouth. It is never too soon to talk to your kids about mental health. We're teaching them about healthy foods and exercise and stuff like that. And all of that goes straight out the window if they're not taking care of this thing. My son is 8 years old, and I'm already teaching him meditation. We talk about mental health because I'm hoping he doesn't develop the same issues that I did. So what I'm getting at is that when I started going to high school, and most of you out there have probably taken a health class before, and if you sit back and think about it, all they did was talk about physical health. They talked about the foods to eat, the exercise to get, safe sex, STDs, diseases like cancer and HIV. They didn't talk about mental illness. And this is something I dive a lot more in depth into in my course about understanding the disease of addiction. I have a whole section on risk factors, on what turns people into addicts and what those leading risk factors are. So if you'd like to take my course, I'll put a link in it in the description below. I had this brain that would not stop going. Even today, it doesn't stop going, but it's not going towards the negative things or the possible scenarios, right? But I've learned to manage it. But when you're a high school student and your brain is constantly worrying and you're looking around at all of your peers and saying, how is everybody dealing with life so much better than I am, right? Like, the exams are coming up and people are like, oh man, I'm kind of stressed, but I guess I'll go study. And for me, it feels like the world is coming to an end. It's just this impending feeling of doom that I don't know how to deal with. Then you have the depression of just not feeling anything, or not wanting to get out of bed, not feeling motivated, the negative talk that we tell ourselves, just every single symptom that you can think of. So you combine these things with the fact that we're not teaching kids about mental illness. I personally had nobody to talk to about it. I discussed this in my book. Like, I was a triathlete. I did football, wrestling, and track. And I wasn't about to go up to one of my teammates in the locker room and be like, what's up, bro? Like, I was feeling super down this morning and didn't want to get out of bed. Like, we don't do that. That's not a normal conversation, especially for men. And that's one of the stigmas that is out there about men and depression. One of my friends, Sarah Fader, she actually just did an article about the stigma behind men and depression. So check her out at the Sarah Fader on Twitter. I'll put a link in my description below. But she did a great article on this. But anyways, aside from that, because women deal with this too, because mental illness affects everybody, but basically, I always told myself I was never going to drink, never going to do drugs because of my mother. I was going to be on the straight and narrow. I didn't want to be like her. I didn't want to end up like her. I didn't want any of that stuff to happen. And what happened to me was my tipping point was after a breakup in high school. You know, that high school sweetheart, the one you're like, I'm in love and I'm going to marry them and we're going to be together forever. And then all of a sudden she just ripped my heart right out of my chest. And I was feeling everything, all of it. And I grew up in a way where you weren't taught to feel your feelings, but I was feeling these feelings so much. And I had the anxiety and depression to deal with. And my whole high school career, I was avoiding parties. I would hang out with my friends. I would play video games. I would do whatever. And finally, I got to the point where I said, you know what? I heard alcohol helps you not feel anything. So I'm going to go try to do that. I drank that first drink. And those of you out there who are watching this from the addiction standpoint, like, you know what I mean. And by no means am I trying to romanticize this, but I remember my first drink and my first drunk. As soon as it went from that like kind of buzz to like I'm drunk, that's when my brain said, boom, that's the thing that you need. When you're struggling your whole life or even the past year or months or whatever it is with mental illness, once drugs or alcohol hit you, your brain immediately says, that is the solution. You need to do that again. So it didn't take long for me to start going to more parties with the immediate goal of just getting completely trashed. And then, you know, I'll do other videos about tolerance and dependency. But long story short, eventually, just a few shots of liquor when I was 18 years old wasn't doing it anymore. That ended up escalating. Then I started tossing in prescription pills and all these other things. And that is one of the main reasons how mental illness leads to addiction. Now, I did another video that I will link about the psychological dependence. You might have seen my interview with Dr. Judson Brewer where he talks about the habit loop, the trigger behavior reward. So just to give you a recap on that, this is how the human brain is developed. This is the thing that helps us survive. This is what has put us at the top of the food chain. This is how other species survived. Is this part of the brain that develops this habit loop. It involves a trigger, a behavior, and a reward. And once you find a trigger, a behavior, and a reward, the brain logs a memory in a part of the brain called the hippocampus, and it says, you need to do that again. The next time you experience this trigger, do this behavior and you'll get a reward. So what happens for a lot of us with mental illness is that when we have that symptom of depression, when we have that symptom of anxiety, the brain immediately says, go drink or use drugs. That will solve your issue. Some of you who have been around and you're in recovery, you hear that saying a lot where it's like, my solution, drugs or alcohol, eventually became my leading problem. And that's what happens to us. Our original solution turns into a problem because we were turning to drugs and alcohol to help out with our symptoms of mental illness because we never got it treated properly by a doctor, a psychiatrist, a therapist, any type of medical professional. We tried self-medicating and our brain developed this habit loop where we were just on autopilot, where every time our anxiety or our depression, so every time one of those symptoms pop up as the trigger, the immediate behavior is to drink or use drugs. And that's how it develops and it turns into this never-ending cycle. and it becomes habitual. And I've talked about this before in my other video that some of you were introduced to me with, where they're talking about addiction is a choice, addiction is a weakness. And this is why we need to start breaking the stigma of addiction and of mental illness. Like, people who have not dealt with mental illness do not know what a struggle that is. Those of you who struggle with mental illness, like, you guys are warriors. Like, I believe that dealing with mental illness, there is no harder battle to fight than one that's up here. It's fighting on a daily basis on what is true, what is false. Are these thoughts in my head actually reality? And it takes a lot of work to overcome that. Some people it's medications. For me, I choose to meditate. But it takes a lot of work to start separating that truth from the false in your brain. So when people are saying that it's a weakness or that drug addiction is a choice, and it's like, heck yeah, it's a choice. Like, if it's gonna quiet down the noise in this thing, that is the easier, softer way for a lot of us. If it will turn down the noise in my brain for even a minute, I will do whatever it takes. And that's why a lot of people turn to drugs and alcohol. That's why a lot of people who said, I will never do heroin, and they escalate to heroin, because we're constantly in this battle of trying to turn that noise down. But like I always say, this is the rewired soul, where we talk about the problem, but we focus on the solution. So yes, mental illness leads to addiction. Fact. But now, what are you going to do about it? Now that you are equipped with this information, what are you going to do with that information? Because we don't just sit back and say, oh, well, I guess I got a mental illness. No, we don't do that. It's like breaking your arm and just saying, oh, well, I got a broken arm. No, you go and you get it treated. Now, I'll do more videos about dealing with mental illness in a more natural way. If you haven't yet, check out my depression hack series. I'm going to start an anxiety hack series as well, because those are the two big ones. But I don't care if you medicate these or you use natural ways, both of them are just as effective. I do highly recommend starting out with medications, even if you don't like to. But eventually you might get to a point where I've gotten to where I no longer need those medications. So the other big thing that I will say is that when talking about the stigma of addiction, talking about the stigma of mental illness, I've mentioned this before, there's too many people that are segregating themselves in this whole realm of mental illness and mental health when it's all intertwined. We all need to come together and work together on this thing, because so many people with mental illness turn to drugs and alcohol. There are a lot of people, I see YouTubers out there who make posts, they make videos about dealing with depression and dealing with anxiety. And it breaks my heart when I hear them say, oh, I deal with my anxiety by, my friend had some, say, Vicodin or something like that. I'm like, no, do not do that. Or they're like, yeah, my anxiety's kicking in, so I went to my friend and they gave me some Xanax. And it's like, no, don't do that either. A lot of people are so uneducated about how mental illness leads to addiction that more people are becoming addicts when they could have just been dealing with a mental illness. Those of us who have mental illness and addiction, we're fighting two separate battles on a daily basis. So we need to get that word out there, and we need to all work together. So please, please, please do me a favor, share this video. Let's get that message out there that this is a big deal. If you have any questions about this stuff, that's exactly what these comments are below. Talk to me about mental illness. Talk to me about addiction. If you have questions on how to get through it, or you do or don't like medications, or you're looking for more holistic ways, non-medicated ways to treat your mental illness, put that in the comments below. Let me know how I can help you. Even if it's not helping you, let me know how I can help somebody that you know. Maybe I can give you some information or give you some knowledge that you might be able to pass along to someone else. So leave comments below. Don't forget to share this video. If you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel, because I'm doing these types of videos on a daily basis, and I will see you next time.